With new, gentler scented Clorox disinfecting wipes, clean finally smells as good as it feels. On everything from lamps to ceiling fans. Even on your kid's toy shark. Oh, ouch. Clorox disinfecting wipes. Now available in... Ooh, crisp lemon. Find it on Amazon. Clorox. Clean feels good.
Hi, I'm here to pick up my son Milo.
There's no Milo here.
Who picked up my son from school?
Streaming only on Peacock.
I'm gonna need the name of everyone that could have a connection.
You don't understand. It was just the 5 of us.
So this was all planned.
What are you gonna do? I will do whatever it takes to get my son back.
I honestly didn't see this coming. These nice people killing each other.
All Her Fault. A new series streaming now only on Peacock.
Disclaimer. This episode contains strong language throughout. This is True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time. Week by week, you'll hear the true stories behind the operations that have shaped the world we live in. You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position? I'm Rhiannon Needs, and this is True Spies from SPYSCAPE Studios. London, 1971. 2 police officers are on their usual route, patrolling the bustling streets of the British capital in their Panda car.
An evening during bank holiday weekend in late August.
The scene is typical. Revellers in the street, black cabs picking up a fare, garbage collectors on the late shift. Turning into Tottenham Court Road, in the middle of the city, the officers spot something suspicious. Driving in front is an old Hillman saloon, without any lights on. And not only that,
his car was sort of wobbling along.
Watching the decrepit machine meander down the street, the police car flashes its siren. The saloon car pulls over. Stepping out of their patrol vehicle, the 2 officers approach the driver's side. Tapping on the window, the officer's torch reveals a man in the driver's seat. A glamorous young blonde woman sat beside him. Immediately, the driver becomes agitated, aggressive.
He refused to give his name. He refused to give a breath test.
Seeing little choice in the matter, the policeman announced that he is under arrest. Stumbling out of the car, the driver mumbles something to his blonde passenger.
The woman was allowed to leave.
Hailing a cab, the blonde steps in and ventures off into the distance. Bundling the anonymous driver into the back of their police car, the officers drive to the station. A few moments later, one of them turns to see the man lying down, his feet resting on the back of the officer's seat. "What are you playing at? Take your feet off the back of my seat," the officer shouts. But the man is undeterred. "You cannot talk to me. You cannot beat me," he replies. "I am a KGB officer." The officer starts laughing. He'd heard it all before. Years on the beat teaching him that detainees will say almost anything after a few too many drinks.
He was taken into custody. He spent the night in prison.
The next morning, the man appears in magistrate's court on a drunk driving charge. Ordinarily, it would have been just one of countless misdemeanors that the police officers in attendance would see every week. But looking at those present in the courtroom, the officers can see that this hearing is far from ordinary. For a start, it's full of Russians. And not just any Russians. They're from the Soviet trade delegation to the UK, including one who posts the man's bail.
This is a guy who's now been bailed out, and he was going to be expected to reappear in court in exactly 1 month.
Unbeknown to everyone in that courtroom, except the man on the stand, what followed was not another inconspicuous hearing. In fact, it would be one of the most seismic events of the entire Cold War. An event that would not only upend British intelligence's battle with the KGB, but also with its closest ally, the CIA.
What's fascinating about this is the endless intelligence failures associated with this story that were only corrected when the British realized that actually one of the greatest threats that we're facing is not the KGB, it's the CIA's paranoia.
In this episode of True Spies, you'll hear all about the man at its heart, Oleg Lyalin.
Elements of his story have appeared in other places, but no one's really come across his files, and I was very lucky enough to get access to his files, to newly declassified US files. There were FBI files, CIA files, even JFK files contained some material relating to this case and to his case in particular.
And you'll also hear how his work leads directly to someone you'll almost certainly have heard of.
It wasn't until 3 decades later that the program would be revived properly, and the person to do that was Vladimir Putin when he came into power.
The Drunk in Department V. Growing up in war-torn 1940s Russia, Oleg Lyalin's home was not a happy one.
He lived in a fairly broken marriage. His parents split up in sort of the late 40s, early 50s. He moved in with his father, and then he moved in with his mother after she died.
This is Richard Kerbaj, a journalist and film producer whose recent book, The Defector, chronicles Lyalin's life and times, along with the many turncoats that went from one side to the other during the height of the Cold War. Broken or not, Lyalin's home was united when it came to their politics.
He grew up in a household that was very much communist-leaning and very much in favor of the Stalin regime. And so he was raised with those ideals and those values and those beliefs.
After the war, though, the regime's paranoia came to Oleg Lyalin's front door.
His mother came under suspicion of spying for the Nazis during the Second World War, but the KGB's predecessor, the NKVD, did not catch up with her until the early 1950s. So that caused a great deal of friction at a family level.
Spurred on by his mother's arrest and a growing restlessness, Oleg became desperate to get out, to see the world beyond Mother Russia. And he knew what might give him that ticket.
Language skills and his ability to speak fluently the English language.
Teaching himself, Oleg became a highly proficient English speaker. And then, an opportunity.
He had been given a scholarship to attend a Marine school in Ukraine. And in essence, that's kind of where his story begins.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
New Icy Hot. Nighttime recovery. Relieves pain at nighttime while your body recovers. Icy Hot. You're so back.
In Ukraine, it wasn't long before his talents caught the eye of some very important people.
He was talent spotted by the KGB purely because of his language skills and his ability to speak fluently. A colleague of his in his class identified that and discussed that with his KGB handlers because his colleague was a co-optee. And so he co-opted Oleg Lyalin in his teens and said,
"The KGB is interested in meeting you." Lyalin jumped at the idea.
And so he went along to speak to the regional officer in Odessa in Ukraine. And very soon he was recruited to start working as an informant, just like a junior informant, to talk about what was happening in the area, in the local area.
After proving his competency as a low-level informant, Oleg was touted for another role.
He could potentially be quite useful person for our illegals program.
The illegals. spies who go undercover in the West, not as Russian diplomats or businessmen, but as Westerners themselves.
And so in 1960, he was taken to the KGB school, the intelligence school, to professionalize his skills. And he learned everything from surveillance, operations, to recruitment, to identifying threats, to cultivating, to compromising, and so on and so forth. And then soon after that, it appeared as though his career was going to be taking off. He was sent to Moscow to prepare for a subsequent deployment to the US to join the illegals.
But the big city came with new temptations. Temptations that he found very difficult to resist. See, despite only being in his early 20s, Lyalin's taste for the finer things in life was already fully developed.
His proclivities in womanizing and drinking, and that in itself may have been a reaction to his own childhood, because he grew up in a fairly impoverished family, and maybe he hadn't seen the lights and he hadn't seen the opportunities that awaited him.
Soon, Lyalin's behavior became a problem.
His first marriage was falling apart, and he kind of just went off the rails.
And his wife wasn't the only one who was sick of him.
The KGB identified that, and as a result, they struck him out of their program. So all this ambition that he had demonstrated, all of the talent that they had tried to cultivate, pretty much came to an end in regards to his potential deployment to the US to become an illegal.
The KGB offered him a lesser role in a decidedly less glamorous setting, the Lithuanian port city of Klaipėda.
Spying on people who were entering the port of Klaipėda. So it was obviously a huge blow to him, because he had these great ambitions about a potential trip to the US to join the illegals, and he got struck out.
Lyalin whittled away his time, diving ever deeper into the bottle. He sat on the sidelines while the most exciting events of the Cold War, from a Russian perspective, simply passed him by.
The CIA had recruited its first Soviet official, a GRU officer called Pyotr Popov. The KGB had identified him as a CIA agent and executed him. In 1961, you had George Blake, who defected from Britain to the Soviet Union. In 1962, you had Oleg Penkovsky, who was a joint CIA and MI6 asset, who had essentially been identified by the KGB and killed. 1963, Kim Philby defect. So in the context of everything that was happening at the time, with all the hysteria and the paranoia, MI5 and the CIA were very convinced that they were overwhelmed, that somehow the KGB had the magic potion.
After 5 years wasting away in Klaipėda, Oleg Lyalin got a second chance. The KGB came knocking again. Not for the prestigious illegals program, but something rather more messy.
In late 1960s, Oleg Lyalin was invited by Department V, which was based just outside of Moscow, to go and train there.
And Department V had a very specific task.
It was also known as the Department of Liquid Affairs. They would essentially liquidate people. They plotted to assassinate politicians.
Alongside assassinations, Department V also focused on sabotage in enemy countries.
They also blew up bridges, they blew up buildings, they compromised individuals.
At Department V's headquarters, Lyalin was given a crash course in its unique and deadly methods.
He learned how to operate as a saboteur, as it were, in the event of a war breaking out between the Soviet Union and the UK. And as an assassin, he learned how to jump out of planes, to parachute. He learned how to run a small group of armed officials, a bit like a militia.
Despite his previous mishaps, Lyalin passed with flying colours.
And he then sat in waiting to be called to go and do something for that department. Eventually,
he got the nod. Department V was sending him to London, a global hotbed of espionage, then and now.
To give some context around that, in the 1960s, late 1960s, when Lyalin came to the UK, Britain had the biggest number of Soviet officials operating in the UK per capita, the biggest number of any Western nation, including the US. So they had 550 Soviet officials were operating in the UK, and it would later become apparent that about 200 of whom were spies.
But with so many Russian diplomats already operating out of its London embassy, the KGB gave Lyalin a different cover.
Lyalin went to Moscow for some training in how to become a trade official, in parentheses, quotation marks. And so they wanted to turn him into a knitwear specialist. He was to come out here to purchase everything from stockings to other knitwear to send back to Moscow. So he was essentially a trade official. That was his cover. And he had to perform that duty while at the same time performing his role as a KGB officer.
The KGB embedded Lyalin inside an official trade mission to the UK, on London's Regent Street, the UK's most famous high-end shopping district.
It became a great cover for him because he would get into central London and he would go and meet his agents in the local area. So at Tottenham Court Road, he would have a lot of his meetings.
Because he was undercover as a trade official, not a diplomat, Lyalin didn't have the protection of diplomatic immunity. But while that was higher risk, it also offered potentially higher reward.
The issue with diplomatic cover is that although it gives you immunity, it also exposes you to the authorities because you're named as a diplomat. So therefore, you're potentially going to be a target because they're going to suspect you of being a potential spy anyway.
Working as a trade official also allowed Lyalin freedom to go anywhere in the country, unlike Soviet diplomats who were confined to London under UK orders.
That was the key point. He was helping plot against targets in the north.
Given almost free rein, having sailed through customs upon arriving in the UK, Lyalin got to work.
He had planned to contaminate the British seawater with radioactive waste. And the plan was to do that and then blame it on the US so that they could damage the special relationship that existed between the US and UK at the time. The other plot was to figure out ways of landing Soviet troops and saboteurs on the English West Coast. The other plot was to identify ways of targeting politicians, to assassinate them, to deploy couriers into Whitehall so they could go in and take out their targets.
Lyalin also developed an inherited contact at City Hall, which proved immensely useful.
And who was able to get the registration numbers of vehicles belonging to MI5, so surveillance vehicles. And that was of great use to the KGB because they were able to use that material to misdirect those cars. So then that way the undercover KGB officers or GRU officers could run their missions in London without being seen, and even potentially outside of London.
But busy as he was, Lyalin still found time for everything else swinging London had to offer.
He was out drinking, he was out womanizing, but he was propositioning colleagues at his own work. And very quickly he started to, instead of recruit agents, he started to go on the dating scene. And he was fairly successful at that, less successful at recruiting agents. So he failed to recruit a single new agent, but somehow he ended up with 4 girlfriends and with a very unhappy wife. So he wasn't exactly very careful.
The KGB had strict protocols on agents' behavior, and for good reason.
Propositioning your colleagues, that was something that was frowned upon. So was the idea of engaging in extramarital affairs because, that would bring you into a state of disrepute and you'd be potentially compromisable as well.
But when it came to bad behavior, Lyalin was more than capable of getting creative.
He knew that, for instance, if he wanted to date local women, so these are British women, he could do so by pretending that he's trying to recruit them for some reason. And he could justify that to his KGB managers.
After all, most, if not all, of Lyalin's colleagues at the Soviet mission in London were genuine civilians. Some of them were even British. They had no idea he was KGB. Among them was a 19-year-old receptionist by the name of Susan Woodthorpe. In researching this story, our guide, Richard Kerbaj, tracked her down.
She played a crucial part in helping me identify a lot of his personality traits and also corroborate some of the information I had about him, because anyone who was involved in that story is long passed on.
For Susan, her Russian colleague couldn't have seemed less like a spy if he tried.
She just thought that he's funny and charming, handsome, very engaging as someone to talk to. He would sort of come in cracking jokes. Sometimes he'd be drunk. He would constantly trip over. And she said to me that had he lived in a more permissive society, he could have been someone who could have worked in entertainment, even television, because he just had that personality about him. He had this bubbly personality. He was quite amicable and vivacious and had this love for life.
Inevitably, Lyalin's wandering eye fell on Susan.
He would take her out on a regular basis for drinks, and he would bring her vodka into work. He would give her caviar and cream sandwiches. He had this enormous charm offensive that he was running to try and befriend her, but also it was beyond befriending. I think, he was very determined and interested in dating her.
Susan never took him up on his advances, one of the few women who didn't. But as time wore on, she noticed that Lyalin seemed increasingly stressed, distant. Clearly the trade mission was heavy going, she thought. But the real reason was rather different.
Now we're in early 1971, and Lyalin had been in the country for 2 years at the time, because he came in early 1969. So 2 years on, he hadn't recruited a single agent. The 3 agents whom he'd inherited proved to be so hopeless that they couldn't learn how to use Morse code properly. One of them ended up exposing his own identity during a botched recruitment attempt. Another one had to be sent on a holiday temporarily just so he could relax because the life was becoming too stressful for him. So these guys were quite hopeless.
And not only that, burning the candle at both ends was starting to catch up with Lyalin.
Life became a little bit too chaotic for him. And he figured the only way around this, given the confrontations he had had with his wife at the time, the only way around this is to just get a divorce.
But there was only one way of securing that. At least in Lyalin's booze-soaked calculus.
He thought the only way to get this done properly without raising any suspicion within the KGB is if I could get expelled from the country. That was his crackpot plan, as it were.
There's only one thing for it, Lyalin thinks. He marched into Hampstead Police Station in North London and declared,
I am a trade official with the Soviet Trade Department here. That's a cover. In fact, I'm a KGB officer, been working in the UK for a couple of years, and I want to speak to MI5.
The police officer across the desk can hardly believe what he's hearing. After some hesitation, though, he dials a number reserved for just such a request.
He was quickly taken to a safe house to be debriefed.
But immediately, Lyalin raises suspicion among his interrogators.
First of all, he agreed to being recorded, so that's immediately a red flag, because if you're there in secret but you're agreeing to being recorded, that would potentially indicate that your employer is aware of what you're doing. Because otherwise, if you're in the process of providing intelligence, there's a good chance KGB is not behind it. They're going to find you and kill you if they discover it. So that became quite suspicious.
Lyalin appears highly unusual in other respects too.
He wasn't there to ask for money. He, in fact, wasn't there to ask for political asylum, which is the common request.
What do you want? The MI5 officers ask.
Can you kick me out of the country?
Now only more bemused, the officers ask, why is that?
And he said, because if you kick me out of the country, I'll be able to return to Moscow with my head held up high, because the KGB would deem that as a good thing. It's kind of status to be kicked out of the country if you're an intelligence officer. It shows how mischievous you are, kind of thing. And then when I get back to Moscow, I'll be able to divorce my wife. I'll be able to begin my relationship officially with a girlfriend. Now, we don't know which girlfriend, because of course he had 4 at the time.
But Lyalin doesn't stop there. He offers up something else of an entirely different dimension.
And then I'll be able to provide you with information as an agent in place from Moscow.
By now, the debriefers are near certain this is a ruse, a Russian game to embarrass MI5.
And they thought, this is very unusual, very suspicious. And so what we need to do is to just keep this guy in place and give him the impression that we're considering it. But meanwhile, what they want him to do is to continue providing information. And so for the next 4 months, MI5 kept him under surveillance. So they took what he said on board, but they didn't believe it immediately. They wanted to corroborate what he was saying.
As the debriefings continue, what Lyalin has to say astonishes the officers.
The KGB was plotting a number of operations through Department V. The KGB wanted to target and kill British politicians in the event of a war breaking out between the Soviet Union and the UK. They wanted to starve the British population by attacking emergency food supplies. They wanted to damage the British economy. They wanted to identify military bases and military buildings to target and blow up. They wanted to go after telecoms and military and intelligence communications and damage those. And they wanted to blow up infrastructure, critical national infrastructure, so to go for everything, including railways.
And here in front of them was the man who reportedly led those plans in the UK. Some of the most serious threats to the country's security and people ever known. The sheer enormity of what this figure was saying stood in direct contrast to his dishevelled, almost clownish appearance.
To MI5, it was naturally very shocking and unnerving because, first of all, they hadn't realized there was a Department V representative here, let alone that there were contingency plans being drawn up right under their very noses at a time when they should have known what was going on.
To prove his credentials, Lyalin gives up all his contacts in Department V and elsewhere for MI5 to cross-reference.
And fairly quickly, even within the first, 4 or 6 weeks, we were able to corroborate a lot of the information he had given about KGB officers working undercover at the embassy and in other places, and also GRU officers working undercover in the UK.
What Lyalin didn't know, however, was the difficult position MI5 was in. Not with the KGB, but with the CIA. For years, Langley had been certain that the Russians were engaging in what was termed the master plan, planting agents inside the British and American intelligence services.
The CIA had knocked back multiple attempts by potential Soviet defectors because they thought them to be sent agents. And both MI5 and the CIA had run multiple mole hunts to try and identify the internal threat.
The CIA had become so paranoid at the prospect of this so-called master plan that they started to suspect almost anybody, including a former head of MI5, even the UK Prime Minister, Harold Wilson.
MI5 had deferred to the US partners, and namely the CIA, in regards to anything to do with intelligence analysis or intelligence thinking or tip-offs. And the reason they had done that, it goes back to the point that I made a little bit earlier about the insecurity that MI5 felt because of its own intelligence failures around Burgess and McLean and Philby and Blake. And so it felt that it had to turn to the US for guidance and wisdom and insights.
So when word of Lyalin's walk-in confession reached MI5's new boss, he was in a bind.
Martin Fernville Jones, who was a Director General of MI5 at the time, rightly thought that if he were to inform the CIA would naturally guide him away from believing this guy. It would just say, well, hold on a second, this is a guy who is one of these sent agents. He's a false agent. You should not be dealing with him.
But Lyalin had already given up hugely significant intel. Would he really roll up the whole of Department V if he was a plant? Biding his time, Furnivall Jones tells MI5 to keep Lyalin on the hook and work to corroborate more and more of what he's saying. Lyalin is told to go on as before, turn up at the Soviet trade mission as usual. Meanwhile, MI5 draws up an unprecedented plan
that became known as Operation Foot. And Operation Foot is essentially the code name for the proposed mass expulsion of Soviet spies from Britain.
Furnivall Jones tells the CIA nothing.
It was a huge turning point for MI5 because up until then, MI5 had deferred to the US partners, and namely the CIA, in regards to anything to do with intelligence analysis or intelligence thinking or tip-offs.
With plans in motion, Lyalin continues his double life. That is until one late summer night when those two worlds collide.
Another turning point that leads us straight back to Oleg Lyalin's behavioral patterns. So the same things that got him kicked out of the illegals program to begin with in 1962, the same thing that sort of threatened his promotions subsequent to that, and the same thing that gripped him in London during his time here over 2 years, would then go on to create this massive turning point, and that was his inclination to party and booze.
One night, Lyalin took to driving one of his many girlfriends around central London after a whole day drinking. After the police spot a Hillman saloon meandering down Tottenham Court Road without any lights on, they immediately arrest him. Winding up in jail, Lyalin is bailed out by a colleague at the Soviet trade mission. It's the final straw for his superiors.
I think that's when the embassy realized that we need to get rid of this guy. He's kind of ineffectual. He's not doing so well at his job. And they must have just looked at the situation that he was in now, a guy who's now been bailed out, and he was going to be expected to reappear in court in exactly 1 month. And he had no diplomatic immunity. So they needed to just bring him back.
For Lyalin, it was now or never. With this new heat, being an MI5 double agent back in Moscow was out of the question.
Because, of course, he felt that he was under pressure. Returning to Moscow at that point was going to compromise his career, compromise his potential safety. And so he got some documents, dozens of documents that he wanted to share with MI5. And then he got in touch with his MI5 handlers and said, right, I want to defect.
But he wasn't alone.
He defects with one of his lovers, who actually happens to be a Russian woman from the trade mission, who herself was married with a child. And then they were quickly whisked away to a safe house, and they were given political asylum. And then they started building their new identity.
The situation had just gotten very real.
Because they knew that the KGB would be out to look for him. Because history has shown us that the KGB identifies where defectors are, or tries to identify where defectors are, and tries to kill them.
Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan are back in Disney's Freakier Friday, now streaming on Disney+.
We switched bodies.
I am freaking out right now. I think I just peed a little.
It's an absolute riot. And the only movie that can be described as
so much weirder than the last time. What last time?
It's the frequel.
You ready?
We've been waiting for.
That absolutely slays.
Disney's Freakier Friday, now streaming on Disney+, rated PG.
Ray-Ban Meta glasses come with open-ear audio, so you can listen to your favorite music without blocking out the world around you.
Hey Meta, play Gorgeous.
Here's Gorgeous by Doja Cat.
You can also ask Meta AI questions.
Hey Meta, when's Doja Cat's next concert?
Doja Cat is playing at the Los Angeles Theater next Tuesday.
Sweet.
Ray-Ban Meta glasses, available at Ray-Ban stores and other authorized retailers.
A KGB defector was always cause for celebration among the beleaguered officers of MI5. But for the moment, they'd need to keep this particular case on the down low.
The only officials who know about it are security officials in the UK, like top security officials, some members of cabinet. Obviously, the Prime Minister would have known about it, and the Foreign Secretary.
It was obvious the KGB didn't know Lyalin was a defector. They'd even let him pack his own bags for his trip back to Moscow. But with Lyalin now in hiding, MI5 knew it wouldn't be long before the KGB sensed that something was up. So they told the Russians themselves.
Which essentially sends the Soviet Union into a panic, because they think, shit, this is our guy who's not just been arrested, but this is the guy who's the representative for the Department V here. what will that mean for us in the way of damage and damage limitations?
But the British have another message for the Russians.
On the 24th of September, 1971, exactly 3 weeks after Oleg Lyalin had defected, the Foreign Office Private Secretary calls in the Soviet chargé d'affaires and informs him that we're intending to expel 105 Soviet officials. Here are their names. You've got about, just a little bit more than a week to leave the country, basically.
This was unprecedented in both manner and scale.
Because up until then, the way that it would work is that you would identify 2 or 3 officers, you'd kick them out, then the Soviet Union would kick out 3 of your own people. So it was a tit for tat. That's just kind of how it went. But this time they wanted to make the point that whoever we kick out will not be able to be replaced. So by virtue of kicking out, say, 100 plus people, those spots will no longer be available. You're going to lose 100 spots to your official deployment here.
The UK government then announces the expulsions to the press. The Russians are stunned. For years they had given MI5 the runaround. Now they were on the back foot, with Department V, one of the jewels in the KGB's crown, in tatters.
And then, essentially, that's when the Soviet Union figured, right, we need to play this back. We need to figure out a way to counter this.
At first, they wheeled out an old enemy of the Brits, their most famous defector, Kim Philby.
To start criticizing the British government, to start accusing journalists working in the UK of being an extension of the spy agencies.
By this point, a media feeding frenzy was going on around the world. But what the press still didn't know was the identity of the person who had triggered such a drastic move.
The public had become aware at this point that there was a defection. They didn't know who the defector was. They didn't know his identity, had no picture, had no idea.
So the Russians tried to seize back the initiative. If the world now knew that there was a high-level defector to the West, the best they could do was get ahead of the story, attack the character and credibility of the man in question.
Someone at the Soviet mission, an official there, called in the Express newspaper and during an interview informed the Express that the person that they're asking about had actually appeared in a very small item in their newspaper a month earlier for a drink driving charge. That's all they had to say.
Almost immediately, the journalists tracked down the report. It's about a man named Oleg Lyalin.
When that happened, the entire world media was now obsessed with this person, Oleg Lyalin.
But ultimately, the KGB know they've lost this round of the Cold War.
All the threats that the KGB had issued and that the Soviet Union at large had issued about how it would retaliate against the UK fizzled out. The UK kicked out 105 Soviet spies. The retaliation was 18 British citizens were kicked out of the Soviet Union. So it was nothing in the way of retaliation. And I think that's because they feared, rightly, that if they do go and retaliate aggressively, then the British had potentially another 100 that they could kick out of the country. The biggest hit, though, was against Department V, because the Department V then had all of its operatives, international operatives, that were recalled by the KGB because they thought, well, the cover's blown, so that's that. And over the next few years, it just couldn't revive its operations and just shut down. So it had a huge and devastating blow on the KGB's Department V department.
Almost as stunned as the KGB were the American CIA, who were tipped off about the announcements mere hours before they went live. Irate, Langley's chief of counterintelligence, James Jesus Angleton, raced to London
to warn MI5 that this guy, who you think is a genuine defector, is in fact one of these very people I've been warning you about for the past 10 years. And you've been hoodwinked. You should have told me about this.
But after 10 years of hunting moles, catching none and turning away several credible leads, Angleton's credibility was shot in the eyes of MI5. By this point, his thinking had become so paranoid that he even thought Henry Kissinger, President Nixon's advisor and right-hand man, was a Soviet spy.
He became so obsessed with his own mission and own determination to identify moles within that he stopped seeing the bigger picture, and that analysis was poisoning the rest of their picture, and in so doing, contaminating the British picture.
As it turns out, MI5 chief Martin Furnival-Jones's decision to keep the CIA out of the loop on Lyalin brought down not just the KGB's Department V, but the CIA's James Jesus Angleton himself.
It wasn't until J. Edgar Hoover got in touch with President Nixon to ask him what he thought of the information that the British were providing through this guy, Oleg Lyalin, at which point Nixon said, "What information?" So then Nixon got in touch with Henry Kissinger to ask him, "Are you aware of this information that we've been getting from the British, from this guy, Oleg Lealin?" And Kissinger said, "I didn't. I had no idea this was going on." So then Kissinger called up the CIA, and CIA very quickly realized that Jim Angleton had been hoarding all of the information, locking it away in vaults.
What the Americans discovered next shocked even the most hardened spy.
They sort of started going through his secret vaults, and they found, thousands upon thousands of documents and bits of information that they had never heard of and had never seen, and that he'd completely withheld from his own bosses at the CIA.
Angleton even had pictures from the autopsy of Bobby Kennedy, the presidential candidate assassinated in 1968. Pictures that had no business in the personal vault of a CIA official. In this new light, it appeared to many in the US government, as it had to MI5 previously, that the CIA's counterintelligence chief had ceased to be effective.
And that sort of precipitated his downfall.
Many spies even began questioning if the KGB's so-called master plan of planting agents was a real thing, or just a figment of Angleton's paranoia.
This so-called master plan did so much damage that even if the KGB had intended to damage the CIA and MI5 to that extent through a campaign, it probably wouldn't have been able to achieve the results that they had set out to achieve. So 1974, Angleton is forced to resign from the CIA.
From a classified location, living under a new identity, Oleg Lyalin could now survey a global espionage landscape unrecognizable from the one that existed up until the moment he had walked into Hampstead Police Station and declared himself a spy. All because he wanted a divorce.
He played sort of an outsized role in the impact that he was able to make in correcting Britain's path to sort of better intelligence understanding and intelligence analysis, and then also breaking up the KGB. So he helped rescue MI5 and save it from its own failures, but he also really damaged the KGB to the point that it's potentially one of its most prestigious departments, sabotage and assassinations department, was forced to shut down.
It wasn't until some 30 years later that Russia's new president brought the unit back to life.
And the person to do that was Vladimir Putin when he came into power. Putin himself, he came through the KGB before becoming president.
Alexander Litvinenko, Sergei Skripal, and several other Russian defectors, they all felt the force of Department V's successors. But Oleg Lyalin? He died in February 1995, aged just 57 years old. The years of drinking caught up with him before his old department could. His last known location and alias? Well, that's still classified. If you'd like to know more fascinating details and hair-raising stories from the life of Oleg Lyalin and the hazy Cold War world of real and planted turncoats, including one agent who knew all about one Lee Harvey Oswald, then Richard Kerbaj's book, The Defector, is for you. I'm Rhiannon Needs. Join me next time for more clandestine adventures on True Spies. Disclaimer. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the subject. These stories are told from their perspective, and their authenticity should be assessed on a case-by-case basis. If you're enjoying this podcast, Please click now to give it a 5-star rating or leave a review. Ratings and reviews help people discover the podcast and help us bring you more great stories. And if you have some time, why not forward the podcast to a friend?